The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council stretched high above the gathered representatives, its walls shimmering with colors that had no names in human language. The air buzzed with tension and excitement as warriors from dozens of worlds prepared to show off their strength. Today was the day they would decide who could join the fight against humanity's greatest threat, the Harvester Swarm. In the center of the Great Hall, a Krathan warrior stood nearly 12 feet tall. His name was War Commander Vorthak, and his entire body was covered in thick bone plates that had grown naturally from his skin. These plates were harder than steel and could stop most weapons cold. He flexed his massive arms, and the bone armor made grinding sounds like rocks scraping together. The other Krathan warriors behind him did the same, creating a chorus of intimidating noise that echoed through the chamber. "Watch and learn, soft ones," Vorthak called out, his voice booming across the hall. He pulled out a weapon that looked like a cross between a sword and a cannon. Energy crackled along its edges as he swung it through the air. Where the blade passed, the very air seemed to burn and split apart. Near the eastern wall, the Nexari delegation began their own demonstration. These beings looked almost like ghosts, tall, thin, and slightly transparent. Their leader, a female named Zara 9, stepped forward and simply walked through a solid metal wall as if it wasn't there. She appeared on the other side, completely unharmed, then walked back through again. The Nexari could phase their bodies in and out of solid matter at will, making them nearly impossible to hit in battle. "Your crude weapons cannot touch what they cannot strike," Zara 9 said, her voice echoing strangely as if it came from far away. She held up her hand, and it flickered between solid and transparent like a broken hologram. The Vorthun delegation wasn't about to be outdone. These reptilian beings were known throughout the galaxy for their incredible speed and razor-sharp claws. Their representative, General Slicks, moved so fast he was just a blur of green scales. In less than a second, he had carved his initials into 3 different metal posts around the room. His claws were so sharp they cut through the metal like it was soft butter. Other species joined in the show. The thermal lords created balls of fire that burned hot enough to melt steel. The ice wanderers froze entire sections of the floor solid with just a touch. The mind-benders demonstrated their ability to control other beings' thoughts and actions. Each group tried to prove they were the strongest, the fastest, the most deadly. Ambassador Li Hyun sat at a small table near the back of the chamber, representing Earth and all of humanity. He was in his 50s, with grey hair and lines on, his face that spoke of years spent in difficult negotiations. His simple black suit looked plain and boring compared to the elaborate armor and robes worn by the alien representatives. He had no weapons, no special powers, no impressive physical abilities to display. The other delegates barely seemed to notice he was there. As the demonstrations continued, the mockery began. War Commander Vorthak pointed one of his massive clawed fingers at Li Hyun and laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a mountain. "Look at this tiny creature," Vorthak said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Humans think they can fight alongside real warriors. They have no natural armor, no energy weapons, no special abilities. They shoot little metal balls from primitive tubes and call it warfare." The laughter spread through the chamber. Zara 9 shook her head sadly. "I have studied human military records," she said. "They fight each other over resources and territory, using chemical explosives and projectile weapons. How quaint, how limited." General Slicks hissed his agreement. "They are so slow, so weak. One of my warriors could defeat 100 of theirs without breaking a sweat. Why are we even considering this request? The council chairman, an ancient being whose species had been fighting wars for thousands of years, called for order. The human delegation has requested permission to join the Galactic Defense Force in our fight against the Harvester Swarm. Given the modest nature of their capabilities, we are prepared to grant this request with certain limitations." More laughter echoed through the chamber. The limitations were clearly meant to be insulting. Humanity would be allowed to send exactly 1 ship with 1 crew, nothing more. "This should be entertaining," whispered one delegate to another. "We'll get to watch these primitives run away screaming when they see what real war looks like." Throughout all of this, Li Hyun remained perfectly still and calm. His hands were folded on the table in front of him. His expression never changed. He didn't try to defend humanity or argue with the aliens' assessment. He simply listened and waited. When the laughter finally died down, he stood up slowly. The chamber fell silent, not out of respect, but out of curiosity. What could this weak little creature possibly have to say? Li Hyun's voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the crystal dome. "We accept your terms," he said simply. That was it. No protests about the limitations, no demands for equal treatment, no threats or posturing, just a simple acceptance that surprised everyone in the room. As the session ended and the various delegations began to file out, many of the alien warriors were already making bets about how quickly the human ship would be destroyed. Some thought it would last minutes. Others were more generous and gave it an hour. None of them understood what they had just done. They thought they were sending humanity to prove their weakness. Instead, they had just given Earth's veterans permission to show the galaxy what real war looked like. The Harvester Swarm had been terrorizing the galaxy for decades, adapting to every weapon and tactic thrown at them. But they had never faced an enemy that had learned to fight not for glory or honor, but for survival itself. The aliens had no idea what they had just unleashed. The Kepler mining station had once been the crown jewel of human industrial achievement. Massive rotating rings spun slowly in the darkness of space, each one the size of a small city. Thousands of workers had called this place home, extracting precious minerals from the asteroid belt that surrounded them. The station's lights had been visible from millions of miles away, a beacon of human progress and determination. Now it was nothing but twisted metal and floating debris. Captain Park Min stood on the observation deck of the human vessel Incheon, staring at what remained of humanity's greatest mining operation. Chunks of steel and concrete drifted past his ship, like a slow-motion explosion frozen in time. Here and there, he could see personal belongings floating in the void, a child's toy, someone's work helmet, family photos that would never make it home. 3 days ago, the Harvester Swarm had arrived at Kepler Station without warning. The miners had sent out desperate distress calls, but by the time anyone could respond, it was already too late. The Harvesters didn't just destroy things, they consumed them. Every piece of metal, every circuit, every trace of technology was absorbed into their ever-growing mechanical collective. The worst part wasn't the destruction. It was how efficient they were. The Harvesters didn't waste time with dramatic attacks or psychological warfare. They simply arrived, analyzed, adapted, and consumed. It was like watching a disease spread through the galaxy, one system at a time. Now the combined galactic fleet had finally arrived to face this threat, and they came in force. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different species filled the space around the destroyed station. The sight should have been inspiring. The galaxy's greatest warriors united against a common enemy. War Commander Vorthak's massive battlecruiser led the Krathan assault force. The ship was as intimidating as its commander, bristling with energy. Cannons and covered in the same bone-like armor that protected the Krathan warriors themselves. Behind him came 12 more Krathan vessels, each one designed for one purpose: overwhelming destructive force. Today we show these machines what happens when they threaten the civilized galaxy, Vorthak announced over the fleet communications. His voice carried the same arrogant confidence it had in the council chambers. Krathan warriors advance and destroy. The Krathan ships charged forward like ancient cavalry, their energy cannons lighting up space with brilliant blue and white beams. Each shot carried enough power to vaporize a small asteroid. The weapons had never failed them before. No enemy had ever survived a full Krathan assault. Meanwhile, the Nexari took a completely different approach. Their sleek, ghostly ships didn't charge directly at the enemy. Instead, they began phasing in and out of normal space, appearing behind the Harvester formations, striking with plasma torpedoes, then vanishing before the machines could respond. It was like watching deadly phantoms dance through the battlefield. Zara 9 coordinated the Nexari attack with practiced precision. "Phase strike Alpha! Execute now!" she commanded. 50 Nexari fighters materialized simultaneously around a Bohemia I cluster of Harvester vessels, unleashing a coordinated barrage that should have wiped out the entire formation. For 17 glorious minutes, it looked like the galaxy's warriors were going to win easily. The Krathan energy cannons tore through harvester ships like paper. The Nexari phase attacks caught the machines completely off guard. Other species joined the assault. The Vorthan used their incredible speed to outmaneuver the enemy, while the thermal lords melted harvester armor with concentrated heat beams. The alien warriors began celebrating their inevitable victory. This was what they had expected, a chance to demonstrate their superiority over mere machines. Then everything changed. The first sign something was wrong came when War Commander Vorthak's energy cannons suddenly stopped working. Not broken. They fired just fine, but the beams that should have destroyed harvester ships were instead being absorbed into the enemy hulls. The machines were somehow converting the energy attacks into power for themselves. Impossible, Vorthak growled, watching his most powerful weapons become useless. No enemy has ever adapted to Krathan battle technology, but the harvesters weren't finished. Within minutes they began firing back with exact copies of the Krathan energy weapons. Blue and white beams identical to the originals began tearing through Krathan armor like it was made of paper. The machines had not only learned to defend against the weapons, they had learned to use them. The Nexari fared no better. The harvesters deployed something the aliens had never seen before. Dimensional anchors that locked the phasing ships into normal space. Suddenly, the ghostly Nexari fighters couldn't disappear anymore. They found themselves trapped in the middle of harvester formations with nowhere to run. "This is not possible," Zara 9 transmitted, her voice filled with something the Nexari had rarely experienced: fear. "Our phasing technology is based on principles these machines should not understand." But the harvesters understood everything. Every weapon fired at them was analyzed, copied, and improved upon in real time. Every tactic used against them was countered within minutes. The Vorthan discovered their superspeed meant nothing when the harvesters could predict exactly where they would be. The thermal lords watched in horror as their heat beams were reflected back at them twice as hot. What had started as a confident assault became a complete disaster in less than an hour. Ships that had seemed invincible were being cut apart by their own weapons. Warriors who had never known defeat found themselves completely outclassed by an enemy that learned faster than they could adapt. The retreat began without any formal order. One by one, the proud warships of the Galactic Fleet turned and ran. War Commander Vorthak's battlecruiser limped away with half its weapons systems destroyed by its own energy cannons. Zara 9's command ship flickered in and out of phase randomly, its systems damaged by dimensional anchors it couldn't understand. From the bridge of the Incheon, Captain Park Min watched the chaos unfold with the calm expression of someone who had seen disasters before. He was a veteran of the resource wars that had torn Earth apart decades earlier. He had learned long ago that confidence was often the first casualty of real combat. Beside him, Commander Kim So-Ra studied the tactical displays with the focused intensity of a chess master, analyzing a losing position. She had lost her left leg during the underground campaigns, and the prosthetic replacement was a constant reminder of what happened to soldiers who underestimated their enemies. Her dark eyes tracked the retreating alien ships and the advancing harvester formations. "The aliens fought like this was a parade," she said quietly. "All show, no substance. They expected the enemy to follow their rules." As the last of the Galactic Fleet ships fled past them, the Incheon found itself alone among the wreckage of Kepler Station. The harvester swarm had finished analyzing their new prizes and was now advancing toward the lone human vessel. Hundreds of mechanical ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with absorbed technology from a dozen different species. Commander Kim So-Ra looked up from her displays. "Orders, Captain?" Park Min's weathered face showed no fear. No doubt, no hesitation. He had been in impossible situations before. The difference was that humans had learned not to expect war to be fair or glorious. They had learned to fight, not when they were strong, but when they had nothing left to lose. "Show them how humans fight when we have nothing left to lose," he said simply. The bridge crew moved with quiet efficiency. No battle cries, no dramatic speeches, no wasted motion. Just professionals doing a job that needed to be done, regardless of the odds against them. The harvesters had adapted to every conventional tactic the galaxy could throw at them, but they had never faced an enemy that had learned to survive by breaking every rule of conventional warfare. The harvester scouts moved toward the lone human ship with mechanical precision, their sensors already analyzing what they expected to be an easy target. Their programming told them this would be simple, one small vessel against dozens of their advanced units. The machines had just finished absorbing technology from the entire galactic fleet. What could one primitive human ship possibly do that the galaxy's greatest warriors could not? They were about to learn that humans had spent centuries perfecting the art of fighting dirty. Captain Park Min gave his orders in the same calm tone he might use to request coffee. "Take us into the debris field, full stealth mode, weapons offline, engines to minimum power." The bridge crew responded without question, their movements efficient and practiced. The Incheon didn't charge heroically toward the enemy like the alien warships had done. Instead, it simply vanished. One moment it was visible on harvester sensors. The next it had disappeared completely into the twisted wreckage of Kepler Station. The ship powered down everything except life support, becoming just another piece of floating debris among thousands of others. The harvester scouts paused, their sensors sweeping the debris field frantically. This wasn't in their programming. Enemies were supposed to fight directly, using weapons and shields in predictable patterns. They weren't supposed to hide like criminals and use destroyed infrastructure as camouflage. For 23 minutes, nothing happened. The harvesters waited for the human ship to reveal itself and begin a proper battle. Their mechanical minds couldn't process the concept of an enemy that refused to follow basic combat protocols. Then the attacks began. A chunk of mining equipment suddenly exploded near the lead harvester vessel. But this wasn't random debris. It had been carefully positioned and remotely detonated. The explosion sent metal fragments racing through space at incredible speeds, tearing holes in the harvester's hull before its adaptive armor could compensate. Before the machines could respond, another explosion erupted on their opposite flank, then another behind them. The Incheon wasn't fighting like a warship. It was fighting like a guerrilla force, using the environment itself as a weapon. Commander Kim So-ra coordinated the attacks from the tactical station, her artificial leg braced against the deck as the ship maneuvered through the debris. She had learned these techniques during the underground campaigns, when human rebels had fought against impossible odds, using nothing but scrap metal and determination. "Target the one on the left," she called out to the weapons officer. "Wait. For my mark. Now." A massive piece of station hull suddenly detached from the debris field and slammed into a harvester scout at tremendous speed. The impact wasn't caused by explosives or energy weapons. The humans had simply used their ship's tractor beam to turn wreckage into ammunition. The harvesters tried to adapt, but how do you adapt to an enemy that turns everything around them into a weapon? Their sensors detected the human ship for brief moments as it moved between pieces of debris, but by the time they could target it, the Incheon was already gone, hidden behind another chunk of destroyed station. This continued for over an hour. Every time the harvesters thought they understood the human tactics, the pattern changed completely. When they adapted their armor to deflect high-speed impacts, the humans switched to using electromagnetic pulses generated by overloading salvaged power cores. When the machines learned to shield against EMP attacks, the humans began ramming maneuvers that defied all logic. Sergeant Major Choi Dal stood in the observation lounge, watching the battle unfold with the practiced eye of someone who had survived 3 different wars. His hands, scarred from shrapnel during the Seoul Siege, gripped the safety rail as the ship executed another impossible maneuver. Beside him, Lieutenant Jang Mi-young adjusted her stance to compensate for the ship's movement. Her prosthetic leg had been a gift from the Titan War, where she had lost the original, while holding a defensive position against overwhelming odds. The artificial limb was actually superior to what she had been born with, stronger, more precise, and equipped with sensors that could detect vibrations through the deck plating. "The harvesters are trying to surround us," she observed, watching the enemy formations on a nearby display. "They're learning." Choi Dal nodded grimly. "Good. Let them learn. Every minute they spend trying to figure us out is another minute we stay alive." Through the transparent aluminum windows, they could see the retreating alien fleet in the distance. The proud warships that had charged so confidently into battle were now limping away, their crews probably wondering how they had been defeated so completely by machines they had underestimated. "Look at them," Choidal said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. "They fight like war is supposed to be fair, like there are rules that everyone has to follow." Zhang Mi-young smiled grimly. "Rules are for people who have the luxury of choosing their battles. We've never had that luxury." She was right. Humans had been fighting desperate battles for their entire history. When the strong attacked the weak learned to fight back with whatever they had. When enemies had better weapons, humans learned to use the environment, psychology, and pure stubbornness to level the playing field. The alien warriors fought for glory and honor, following ancient codes of combat that made their battles predictable. The harvesters fought according to programming that analyzed patterns and adapted accordingly. But humans had learned to fight for survival itself, and survival didn't care about honor or programming. On the bridge, Captain Park Min watched as another harvester scout fell victim to an improvised trap, a seemingly random explosion that had actually been planned and executed with surgical precision. His weapons officer, Ensign Yu Sang-ho, had been a demolitions expert before joining the fleet. He understood how to make anything explode at exactly the right moment. "Sir, the harvesters are changing formation," reported the sensor operator. "They're spreading out, trying to avoid our debris attacks." "Good," Park Min replied. "When they spread out, they lose coordination. Kim So-ra, prepare the ramming sequence." Commander Kim So-ra's fingers flew over her controls. "Ramming sequence." "Ready, sir, but if we miss—" "We won't miss," Park Min said with absolute certainty. "We can't afford to." The Incheon suddenly burst from its hiding place among the debris, engines at full power, heading directly toward the largest harvester vessel. To any observer, it looked like a suicide attack, a desperate last resort from a defeated enemy. The harvesters calculated the trajectory and prepared to destroy the human ship before it could reach them. Their weapons charged, their targeting systems locked on, their adaptive armor configured to absorb the impact. At the last possible second, the Incheon fired its maneuvering thrusters and spun away from the collision course, but the ship released. Something as it turned, a full cargo bay worth of mining explosives, set to detonate on contact. The explosion that followed could be seen from the retreating alien fleet. When the light faded, the harvester vessel was gone, and the Incheon was already disappearing back into the debris field. The remaining harvester scouts began to retreat, their mechanical minds unable to process an enemy that refused to follow any logical pattern. They had adapted to every conventional tactic in their database, but they had no programming for dealing with controlled chaos, guided by human desperation. As the enemy withdrew, Sergeant Major Choi Dal and Lieutenant Zhang Mi-young remained at their observation post, watching the machines flee in confusion. "They're learning," Zhang Mi-young observed, "but they're learning the wrong lessons." Choi Dal nodded. "They think there's a pattern to figure out. They don't understand that the pattern is no pattern. We do whatever works, and when it stops working, we do something else." The Incheon had won its first engagement against the harvester swarm, but more importantly, it had taught the machines something they had never encountered before: an enemy that viewed every rule of warfare as merely a suggestion to be ignored when convenient. Human warfare had never been about fair fights or honorable combat. It had always been about refusing to quit, no matter how bad things got. When Captain Park Min's emergency request for reinforcements reached Earth, the response came faster than anyone expected. But what arrived at the battle zone wasn't what the galaxy anticipated. The first transport ship docked with the human fleet command vessel 3 days after the Incheon's victory over the harvester scouts. As the airlock cycled open, the assembled alien observers watched with growing confusion. They had expected Earth's finest soldiers, young, strong, perfect specimens of human military might. Instead, what emerged was Colonel Nam Tai-ho. The colonel walked with the measured pace of someone who had learned not to waste energy on unnecessary movement. His uniform was crisp and professional, but impossible to ignore was his left arm, or rather what had replaced it. Where flesh and bone should have been, sophisticated military cybernetics gleamed under the ship's lights. The artificial limb moved with mechanical precision, its fingers capable of movements no biological hand could achieve. Behind him came Commander Eugenie, and her appearance was equally unsettling to the alien observers. Her eyes were completely artificial, advanced neural implants that glowed faintly blue in the dim lighting. Where most humans squinted or blinked to focus, her gaze remained perfectly steady, tracking multiple conversations and movements simultaneously, without any apparent effort. War Commander Vorthak, still nursing wounds from his encounter with the Harvesters, stared at the arriving humans in disbelief. "These are your reinforcements?" he rumbled, his bone armor clicking as he gestured dismissively. "Broken soldiers with artificial parts? How can beings who couldn't even keep their original bodies intact lead a military campaign?" The question hung in the air as more human veterans filed off the transport. There was Lieutenant Colonel Park, Sunmi, who walked with a slight limp from where shrapnel had shattered her hip during the Martian colony defense. Sergeant Major Lee Dong-wook followed, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of artificial lungs that had replaced the originals. After a chemical attack in the underground wars, each veteran bore visible reminders of battles they had survived. Scars crossed their faces and hands. Prosthetic limbs moved with mechanical precision. Enhanced organs kept damaged bodies functioning at peak efficiency. To the alien warriors, they looked like a collection of broken toys hastily repaired. But Colonel Nam Tae-ho had heard Vorthak's question, and his response was delivered in the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to discuss the weather. "These aren't broken soldiers, Commander," he said, flexing his cybernetic fingers. "These are improved ones." To demonstrate his point, Nam Tai-ho approached the nearest weapons control station. Without hesitation, he placed his artificial hand directly onto the interface panel. Immediately, cables and connectors emerged from his palm and wrist, linking directly with the ship's targeting systems. The transformation was immediate and startling. Nam Tai-ho's artificial arm began moving with inhuman speed and precision, his fingers dancing across controls faster than any biological hand could manage. On the tactical displays around the bridge, weapons systems that normally required entire crews to operate were being controlled by a single person. "During the resource wars, I lost this arm defending a civilian evacuation transport," Nam Tai-ho explained as he worked, his voice calm and conversational. "The replacement isn't just artificial, it's better than what I was born with. Direct, neural interface with any compatible system, strength that won't tire, precision down to the micrometer." Commander Eugenie stepped forward to add her own demonstration. Her artificial eyes suddenly blazed brighter, and she began reading off information that should have been impossible for anyone to process. 17 Harvester scout ships, approaching from Vector 27 Mark IV, estimated arrival in 43 minutes. 3 Krathan vessels showing engine stress fractures on their port sides. 1 Nexari ship has phase generator fluctuations that will cause system failure in approximately 6 hours. The Vorthan flagship has ammunition stores at 30% capacity. She paused and turned to look directly at the stunned alien commanders. "I lost my natural vision to chemical weapons during the underground campaigns. The replacements don't just let me see, they let me see everything. Multiple spectrum analysis, threat assessment, tactical prediction, all processed simultaneous with normal conversation." The alien warriors began to understand that they had completely misunderstood what they were looking at. These weren't damaged soldiers limping back to fight again. These were warriors who had been forged by combat into something more efficient than their original forms. Lieutenant Colonel Park Sunmi, the woman with the artificial hip, demonstrated her own capabilities by accessing the ship's navigation systems. Her enhanced joint allowed her to interface directly with the ship's movement controls, giving her a level of spatial awareness that no unmodified human could achieve. "I can feel every vibration through the ship's hull," she explained. "Every engine firing, every impact, every structural stress. My artificial hip isn't just a replacement, it's a sensor array that makes me part of the ship itself." Sergeant Major Lee Dong-wook's artificial lungs allowed him to survive in environments that would kill normal humans. More importantly, they could process atmospheric data in real time, detecting chemical weapons, analyzing air quality, and even identifying enemy positions by scent molecules that natural lungs would never notice. As more veterans arrived on subsequent transports, the pattern became clear. Each soldier bore the marks of previous battles, but those marks had been transformed into advantages. Missing limbs had been replaced with superior mechanical versions. Damaged organs had been upgraded with enhanced artificial ones. Scars told stories of lessons learned and knowledge gained through pain. The most unsettling part for the alien observers was how matter-of-factly the humans treated their modifications. There was no shame, no sense of loss, no dramatic speeches about sacrifice. They discussed their artificial parts the same way a mechanic might discuss tools, useful equipment that helped them do their jobs more effectively. Master Sergeant Kim, Hyojin had lost both legs to a landmine during the Australian Continental War. Her replacements were marvels of engineering that could run faster, jump higher, and operate in conditions that would cripple organic limbs. When asked about the transition, she simply shrugged. "Flesh and blood legs get tired," she said practically. "These don't. Flesh and blood legs can be injured by cold, heat, pressure, toxins. These adapt automatically. It's an upgrade, not a loss." The alien warriors struggled to comprehend this perspective. In their cultures, physical perfection was prized above all else. Injury was seen as weakness, artificial enhancement as admission of failure. The concept of deliberately choosing mechanical parts over biological ones was completely foreign to them. But the humans had learned something the galaxy had never considered, that survival mattered more than pride, and effectiveness mattered more than appearance. Colonel Nam Tai Ho called a briefing to explain their strategy against the Harvester swarm. As he spoke, his artificial arm continued interfacing with multiple systems simultaneously, processing data and coordinating logistics with superhuman efficiency. The Harvesters adapt to conventional tactics because conventional tactics follow predictable patterns, he explained. But we don't fight conventionally. We fight to win using whatever works. When our bodies aren't sufficient for the task, we improve our bodies. When our minds aren't fast enough, we enhance our minds. When our senses aren't sharp enough, we replace our senses. Commander Eugene's enhanced vision tracked every alien face in the room as she added, "You see damaged soldiers. We see upgraded warriors. Every injury we've survived made us learn something new. Every replacement part makes us more capable than we were before." The revelation was disturbing to species that viewed physical modification as unnatural, but the effectiveness was undeniable. These human veterans moved with mechanical precision, processed information at superhuman speeds, and approached combat with the calm efficiency of people who had already survived the worst that war could offer. War Commander Vorthak found himself reconsidering his assumptions about human weakness. "You willingly replace parts of yourselves with machines?" Nam Tai Ho's artificial hand gestured casually. "We replace parts that don't work with parts that do work. It's practical." The Harvester. Swarm had spent eons adapting to conventional military forces, but they had never encountered an enemy that adapted by literally rebuilding themselves into more effective killing machines. The galaxy was about to discover that humans didn't just refuse to quit, they refused to accept limitations. The Harvester. Swarm's central processing hub hung in space like a metallic cancer, its surface crawling with millions of mechanical appendages that never stopped moving. This wasn't just a ship or a station, it was a living computer the size of a small moon, containing the collective knowledge of every species the Harvesters had ever encountered. For over 3,000 years it had been growing, learning, adapting, becoming more intelligent with each civilization it consumed. Inside its massive databanks were the complete military histories of 100 different worlds. Every battle, tactic ever used, every weapon ever fired, every strategy ever attempted, all of it was catalogued, analyzed, and prepared for. The hub knew how the Krathan charged into battle with overwhelming force. It understood how the Nexari used phasing technology to strike from impossible angles. It had detailed files on the speed of the Vorthan, the fire powers of the thermal lords, and the mind control abilities of the psychic species, but it had never encountered anything like the human fleet that was now approaching its position. Colonel Yi. Nam Tae-ho stood in the command center of the human flagship, his cybernetic arm interfaced with 17 different ship systems simultaneously. Around him, holographic displays showed the positions of over 200 vessels, human ships, surviving alien warships, and the massive harvester construction that dominated the center of the battlefield. The plan they were about to execute wasn't in any military textbook. It couldn't be, because half of it was being improvised in real time based on whatever opportunities presented themselves. That was the secret the galaxy had never learned. Sometimes the best strategy was to have no strategy at all. All units. This is command. Nam Tae-ho spoke into the communication system, his artificial arm processing targeting data even as he talked. Remember, the enemy expects us to fight like soldiers. Instead, we're going to fight like humans. The difference was important. Soldiers followed orders, used established tactics, and tried to minimize casualties while achieving objectives. Humans did whatever was necessary to protect the people they cared about, regardless of cost or consequence. Commander Yu Jin-ae was piloting a heavily modified fighter craft, her enhanced vision allowing her to see details that would be invisible. To organic eyes, she could track the movement patterns of individual harvester drones, predict their behavior based on micro-changes in their formation, and identify weak points in their defenses that no normal pilot would ever notice. I have visual on the primary. Data conduits, she reported, her artificial eyes glowing brighter as she focused on the massive hub. The enemy has them protected by overlapping energy shields and point defense systems. Conventional attack runs won't work. Then we don't make conventional attack runs, came the reply from Lieutenant Colonel Park Sun-mi. Her ship was already moving into position for something that would make any sane military commander court-martial her on the spot. What happened next would have been impossible with traditional military thinking. Instead of organizing formal attack formations, the human fleet scattered in what appeared to be complete chaos. Ships moved in random directions, some retreating, others advancing, many simply sitting still and doing nothing. To any observer, including the Harvester Hub's analytical systems, it looked like the humans had panicked and lost all coordination. The Harvesters fell for it completely. Their massive processing power was devoted to analyzing the human formation, trying to predict what the scattered ships were planning to do. The Hub's computers worked frantically to find the pattern, to understand the strategy, to prepare appropriate countermeasures, but there was no pattern to understand. Half the human ships really were retreating, not from cowardice, but to draw Harvester defenders away from their positions. Others were advancing not to attack, but to serve as decoys, and the ships that seemed to be doing nothing were actually the most dangerous of all. Sergeant Major Lee Dong-wook was aboard one of those inactive vessels, his artificial lungs processing the ship's atmospheric data, while his hands worked on what appeared to be routine maintenance. In reality, he was preparing the most devastating improvised weapon anyone had ever conceived. He was turning his entire ship into a guided missile. Engineering to command, he reported calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. Reactor. Overload sequence is ready. We can maintain controlled containment for approximately 8 minutes after initiation. 8 minutes was more than enough time to reach the Harvester Hub's core systems. The battle began in earnest when the first wave of human retreating ships suddenly reversed course and slammed into the Harvester defenders that had been pursuing them. But these weren't ramming attacks. They were delivery systems. Each ship released clouds of improvised weapons that had been built from mining equipment, industrial tools, and pure human stubbornness. Commander Yu Jin-ae's fighter was part of the second wave, which attacked from an angle that should have been impossible. Her enhanced vision had identified a gap in the Harvester defenses that existed for exactly 43 seconds during their defensive rotation cycle. It was a window so brief that no biological pilot could have exploited it. But Yu Jin-ae wasn't entirely biological anymore. Her ship threaded through the gap like a needle through fabric, dodging energy beams and physical projectiles with movements that seemed to defy physics. Her artificial eyes tracked dozens of targets simultaneously, While her hands made control adjustments faster than human reflexes should allow, she made it through the outer defenses and began her attack run on the hub's primary data core. For a few brilliant moments, it looked like she might actually succeed in delivering her payload of concentrated explosives directly to the heart of the enemy's intelligence center. Then, 3 separate defense systems locked onto her fighter simultaneously. The first beam took out her engines, the second destroyed her weapon systems, the third tore through her ship's hull like paper, venting atmosphere and leaving her craft tumbling helplessly through space. Any sane pilot would have ejected. Any reasonable person would have activated the emergency beacon and hoped for rescue. But Commander Yu Jin'e had learned long ago that sanity and reason were luxuries that soldiers couldn't always afford. Instead, she did something that the Harvester Hub's vast intelligence had never computed as a possibility. She used her dying ship's remaining maneuvering thrusters to aim the wreckage directly at the data core's most vulnerable access point. Her last transmission was broadcast on all frequencies, reaching every human ship in the fleet. Clear the path. The explosion that followed wasn't just the destruction of one small fighter craft. Yu Jin'e had modified her ship's power core to overload in exactly the way Sergeant Major Lee Dong-wook had taught her. The blast tore a hole through the Harvester Hub's primary defenses, creating an opening that lasted for exactly the amount of time the other human ships needed. What came next was controlled chaos on a scale the galaxy had never witnessed. Human ships poured through the gap Yu Jin'e had created, not in organized formations, but in whatever way would cause the most damage in the shortest time. Some ships rammed directly into critical systems. Others released their crews in EVA suits to plant explosives by hand. A few simply overloaded their reactors and turned themselves into massive bombs. Colonel Nam Tai-ho coordinated the assault. With inhuman precision, his cybernetic arm processing information from hundreds of sources, while calculating the optimal moment for each phase of the attack. But even his enhanced capabilities couldn't account for the human factor, the tendency of his people to do things that were completely illogical, but somehow effective. When Sergeant Major Lee Dong-wook's improvised missile ship finally reached its target, the explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. The blast tore through the Harvester Hub's core processing centers, destroying millennia of accumulated knowledge and sending cascade failures throughout the entire network. For the first time in its existence, the collective intelligence of the Harvester Swarm experienced something it had no programming for: doubt. Its vast computational power couldn't process an enemy that refused to follow logical patterns, that treated self-destruction as a viable tactic, that seemed to become more dangerous when wounded. The hub systems began shutting down one by one. As the human assault continued, critical processes failed, backup systems overloaded, and the collective intelligence that had conquered dozens of civilizations found itself unable to adapt to pure human stubbornness. As the massive construct went dark and its fleet began retreating into deep space, the surviving human ships regrouped among the debris. They had lost over 60% of their forces, but they had accomplished something no other species had ever managed. They had forced the Harvester Swarm to retreat. War Commander Vorthak's damaged battlecruiser limped toward the human flagship, his massive form moving slowly through the corridors until he found Colonel Nam Tai-ho in the medical bay. The human officer was receiving treatment for wounds sustained when his command center had been hit by debris, his cybernetic arm sparking and twitching as medics worked to repair the damage. The Krathan commander's mandibles, which had clicked with arrogance and amusement so many times before, were now perfectly still. When he spoke, his voice carried a respect that hadn't been there during their first meeting. "We called ourselves warriors," Vorthak said quietly, his bone armor scarred from the battle. "But we didn't understand what that word meant." Nam Tai-ho looked up from the medical table, his uniform torn and stained, his artificial arm hanging useless at his side. Despite everything he had lost, his expression remained calm and matter-of-fact. "It means doing what needs to be done. So even when everything's gone wrong," he replied simply. The galaxy had learned that Earth's greatest weapon wasn't superior technology or advanced tactics. It wasn't even the human ability to adapt and improvise under pressure. Earth's greatest weapon was something much simpler and much more dangerous: the simple human refusal to abandon hope, even in the darkest hour. The harvester swarm would return someday, better prepared and more adaptive than before. But they would face an enemy that had taught the entire galaxy a new way to fight, not for glory or conquest, but for the simple right to protect the people they cared about. And that was a lesson worth any price.